Hi, Craig. Yep, I see your hand up. Just one second.
Yeah. Okay. Uh,
Hello,
right.
everyone.
Hi, Craig.
This is Emanuele.
Oh, hi, Emmanuel. Okay. So I will just move you to an attendee then.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think you need to rejoin, and it should.
No, it's already here.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for making it here. Thank you to our panelists for making time for this session, and I hope everyone's looking forward to a really enlightening, interesting, useful discussion. Uh, so, my name is Pranav. I am the communications lead at the Center for Internet and Society, and this webinar is two things. It is the launch event of a report that some of us have been working on at the Center for Internet and Society, and at the with support from the Global Disinformation Index for the past few months. This is a report that looks at disinformation in the Indian digital news media market and tries to evaluate different news sites based on their perceived risk of disinformation. And today we are launching the report uh, that provides data on the evaluation, on the methodology we used, and our findings. And uh, this report launch is also accompanied by a panel discussion, which will happen during this session, where we have three panelists moderated by my colleague Tosha Sarkar. Our panelists are Dhanya Rajendran, who is the founder and chief editor of the News Minute. We have Zainab Akbar, who is an independent researcher who has extensively researched on disinformation incidents over the past few years. And we have Emmanuel, who is representing the Global Disinformation Index, who is the lead project manager at the Global Disinformation Index. So I'll just speak a few words about our report and then hand it over to Tosha, who will be moderating the session. Tosha is my colleague at the Center for Internet and Society, and she has extensively researched on intermediary liability and free speech at many of our research projects at the Center for Internet and Society. So our report, um, which was supported by the Global Disinformation Index, it looks at close to 60 Indian news sites across three different languages. And we evaluated each news site on the basis of many different criteria, which borrowed from a methodology that GDI, the Global Disinformation Index, had created. And I think Emmanuel will be able to speak more about our methodology during the panel discussion. But the goal of this report was to serve as a reference document for everyone who is interested in looking at the digital news market in India, and uh, more specifically to stakeholders who wish to contribute to the news market in terms of funding. And this report serves as a document that will enable the stakeholders to decide useful sources of useful news media that are less likely to promote disinformation or publish disinformation. And for stakeholders who are interested in essentially defunding disinformation, this report should serve as a great resource material that guides their decisions in which news platforms to support. After this event, all attendees, all registered attendees will be receiving a copy of this report, and the report will also be published on our website and on the website of the Global Disinformation Index. But yeah, so with that being said, I want to hand it over to Tosha, who can start off the panel discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Pranav. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists and to our audience who have tuned in today to witness the launch of the event as well as the panel discussion. As Pranav has mentioned, and you might have seen it in our concept note and in all our publicity materials, the report is essentially sort of work to understand the risks of disinformation Indian digital media market poses. And our hope is that this panel discussion is sort of a place to affirm the need for this research, but also a place from which further conversations on this can be posed in the role Indian digital media market plays in being a reliable place of information for Indian leaders, and any sort of recommendations and solutions our esteemed panelists will definitely bring to the table. We do have a little bit of time dedicated to specific questions and answers. So if you have any questions during the course of the research, please feel free to drop them on the chat box. With that being said, I think my first question would be to Dhanya. You have had the opportunity of seeing the Indian digital media market grow in your course of work, and it has grown in so many ways, right? It's grown in terms of the languages in which content is being produced. It has grown because the internet access across India has grown. But in your opinion, what do you think are some critical changes or some problematic areas, problematic ways in which the market has flourished, and that maybe we should think about?
Hi Tosha. So first thing, I was reading the report, and I think it's from the report itself we can understand what exactly are the problems, right? For example, your report has something called an operation pillar, and that's where you have found out that most websites do not give correct information. As in, operational pillar is where the websites have to disclose what is their funding, what is their revenue, etc. And I think that definitely is a huge concern, not just for digital media, but for media platforms across. And I think when media is not transparent with its funding, it also creates a doubt in the minds of the reader or the consumer as to what their allegiances are, which way are they aligned, etc. So it's very important that media houses do disclose their funding and revenue as much as possible. And when that does not happen, it also, I think, provides a weapon to those who have been systematically trying to discredit all media, right? So you take examples of a few media houses which do not disclose such information, and then you just randomly said everybody does not do it. So I think that's one problem. I was actually quite surprised that the survey did not find that the survey was actually finding the content pillar where most people scored well. The content pillar has been defined as including negative targeting, degree of bias, accuracy of headline, and received a strong average score. I was quite surprised that most websites got an average score in that. So I'm not exactly sure how you all went about it. Uh, the other thing, Tosha, is this one peculiar finding, which I agree with, is that more people are relying on online news, but that does not equate to greater trust, the finding says. It shows that a greater number of Indians trust news from newspapers and magazines than they do from online sources, though they do read online sources more. I think that's natural considering that most mainstream media, including TV and print, have been around for a longer time. Their penetration is way higher. And by penetration, I mean they reach simply because they have existed for so long and they have the resources at their hands to also further their reach. But what I would India Today, Times Now, Republic, etc. Right now, if you look at the television arm of that particular company and the digital arm of that company, they will both have very different characters. The same applies to a Hindustan Times newspaper or a Malayalam Manorama newspaper and their website. Now, how does it differ? According to me, at least, when it comes to television, they're more belligerent, aggressive, I would say non-factual, targeting communities, etc. Like if you take a Times Now or Republic, at the same time, the digital end will not be as belligerent or aggressive. In newspapers, I find a different trend where the newspaper itself will be more responsible, more balanced, mature, etc. But the digital arm could be sexist, bigoted, and all those. So most of the mainstream media houses, clearly that maybe that's because the editors are different for the digital portals and for the newspaper. But I think, and also they could be playing a game where the Times Group, for example, is Times Now and Mirror Now, right? They both have two different characters. So that way, I think the digital arm of most media organizations in India, of traditional media, operate very differently from what the newspaper or TV does, which is perhaps why people find it easier to trust the same, like the same Times Now or the same Times of India's newspaper rather than their digital portal. Other than that, I think I agree with most of the findings, but I would just like to say that, see, there's no way we can deny that there is disinformation. There is a lot of concern that there is, of course, even fake news. I mean, you have looked at only few websites, but imagine the number of websites which are there in languages. For example, I head an organization called DigiPub. In the last 1 month, we have got around 75 websites registered with us, and we have got registration requests coming in every day, and we have not even heard of most of these websites, and they operate across Indian languages. And we are going through some of their content to see if they're reliable, etc. But it's a very difficult exercise. So I'm not denying that there is disinformation, there is fake news, etc. But what the government of India has proposed, which is the digital rules, are definitely not the way out. I'm all for self-regulation in the industry to have some sort of a code. But what the government of India is proposing and what it has brought about is definitely not the way forward.
Thanks so much, Sanya. I think I can maybe give like a very quick summary of how we have analyzed the content pillar, which has been a sample of 10 most read articles per site. So at any given point of time, that can vary and that may not reflect the entire editorial standard of the website. So that's an obvious maybe the scope limitation that we had faced. And I will come back to you with I have many follow-up questions for you. But I think I'll go to Emmanuel to maybe understand, now that you have talked a little bit on Indian digital market and its propensity for disinformation via different media channels. It'd be really interesting to hear from you in terms of what the GDI does, what the methodology is, and how it works with companies and stakeholders to defund disinformation.
That sounds good. By the way, thank you so much, Dania, for your insights on the market. This is really useful to know, and this is something that we're also seeing in other markets, the difference between television, print, and digital, and definitely, yeah, this is something we'd like to expand. So in the next few minutes, I'll just share a quick presentation on just to give an overview of who the GDI is. By the way, anyone lead product manager at GDI. My role is really to make sure that what we produce is high quality in terms of rating, and it also has an impact in the world, which means being really adopted by the tech industry. So we will go through the little slides here. We'll see the really everyone, the large majority of the population in India believes that advertisers have a role to play in changing in making this problem better. So GDI, we are a global nonprofit. We are founded on 3 pillars: being independent, neutral, and transparent. I won't go in extensive detail on it, but we think this is very important and what really makes us different from other initiatives in this space. How we define disinformation is also very important. There are many definitions around fake news. We stay a bit away from the definition of fake news in itself, even though it's considered widely like a synonym. The way we really look at it is really not true or false. We think this is kind of a dichotomy that doesn't really express the full extent of the issue. So we define really an adversarial narratives. So any narrative that it creates a conflict among the population, particularly targeting a group, an institution, or science. Everyone is kind of familiar with groups. In terms of hate speech, really what comes to mind. But when it comes to science, like we've seen in the last year with the pandemic, that can have really clear real world harms when science is attacked. This is a quick overview of our markets, and I just quickly, I won't go through the AI portion of what we do, but really our ratings are based on machine learning on one hand. So we use 18 content classifiers. We track about 18 narratives at the moment and adding more. And the other spectrum of what we do is this media market assessment. So we really think it's important to have both the automation side and the human intelligence working together. As the way the internet traffic is distributed is highly concentrated on the top. The few sites get a lot of traffic, and those are the ones that we try to capture in a media market assessments, like the one just released for India. And then we look at the long tail of sites, the small sites. There is really no time to really, there's no resources to check manually, and so we amplify our efforts using machine learning. I won't touch on all the machine learning part today. I just wanted to mention a few quick facts on India. Previously I worked in Google on emerging markets, launched AdSense for India. So I'm familiar with India as such an important market. But it is the fastest growing media market globally. And it's incredible how quickly it's growing in terms of time spent online, both as shared the overall media market spends and in absolute terms. So it's really an incredibly critical market, and we see this from the folks we're talking to in ad tech. They're completely aware of this. Brands are also very aware that India is strategic. And this is, Daniel, to what you mentioned earlier, this is an interesting start regarding the Elderman Trust Barometer. So there is really an issue with trust on the web. And what is really interesting is that advertisers are really held accountable for fake news as an issue. So we think there is a solution here. Getting this data in the hands of the right folks can really shift the incentive structure on the web. So I'll very quickly go through the methodology, but I don't want to monopolize this. We can share this afterwards. The 3 pillars, we touched on this. The GDI approach, what is really the key takeaways is that we tried our best to really keep the system unbiased, as scalable and comparable across the world. So we have process to select the most important sites. Selection is a very important and difficult part of what we do. We keep into consideration web traffic, social media share, but also other traits like regional coverage to make sure we cover the key markets. This is the sites list we covered. In this case, we covered mostly English and Hindi sites, although India, of course, is a subcontinent. There are so many language markets, and we will go back and reiterate with new studies, and we're glad to get feedback on key sites that might be missing here. India is a really difficult country. It's been so big. Risk rating. I just wanted to mention here the way we do this statistically. We use standard deviation, which creates a risk score that can really be compared globally, which is really useful in creating the index. Disinformation level. This is the distribution of sites across different risk levels. So we see interesting thing in India. There is actually no maximum or minimum risk. It's pretty distributed around the median level. The only thing I will mention here is that we have two reviewers independently picked looking at each piece of content, and each piece of content is really a scrape of anything that can give a clue of what site is actually coming from. So the name of the author, the name of the site is only pure text. So the content is really analyzed as content itself. So we take plenty of steps for this. So I think I'll just stop, and I don't know if you want to add anything, any questions, or
yeah, I think
elaborate.
Yeah, I'll probably circle back to you, because I think it'd be really interesting to hear from your familiarity with other markets and any trends or any patterns you see vis-a-vis India. But I think finally I'd like to go to Zainab, and you have done so much research on the role of Indian digital markets in I put myself on mute. You have done so much research on the role of digital media markets in production versus being agents of the spread of disinformation, right? So, Zainab, in your opinion, what have you exactly found? Like, you've done that empirical research bit that may not be like exactly what the GDI report is providing, but it'd be great if we could hear from you in terms of in some instances you can share in the role the digital media markets play.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tosha. I'll also just screen share and try to show you some examples that I've put together. Just give me a second. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's visible now. Yeah, so basically I've divided the presentation to talk about three different things in the way media houses emerge in the fake news cycle. So sort of making it like a story wise, what I try to do is I try to divide of instances of media houses sharing fake news, the reasons of why probably they fall into that trap, and also look at how media houses in turn are used in the production cycle itself. So going ahead, so the first would be how has media houses been a part of the misinformation ecosystem. So there are certain instances that I can quote over here. So the one that obviously comes to our mind is misreporting. So misreporting can happen in terms of not verifying the story. So if you take the first story over here, the story says that this person, Azam Khan from Samajwadi Party, has said that he will take Jal Samadhi, which means water burial, if he is not invited to the Ram Mandir Bhumi Pujan. The mistake that happened over here is that the Azam Khan they were supposed to report about was another person from a Muslim Sevak Manch rather than the Samajwadi Party. So the lack of verification of facts or quotes that were given led to a misreporting of a story. Similarly, sensationalist headings is something that we all know exists. So things like using exaggerated numbers, using gender, using what I could call poverty porn, are something that we commonly see in sensationalist headings. So the example here that I've quoted is that a goat was arrested because it was not wearing a mask, and this story became so viral, and it went to an extent that the Kanpur police commissioner had to tweet out saying that we took the goat to keep it safe so that the owner can reach it, not because it was not wearing a mask. So it's clickbait, clearly, and but these kind of news sort of create some sort of, I don't know, wonder. So every time we talk about media misreporting a certain news in targeting a communal party or targeting somebody else, but it's also the use of satire or jokes that use, and that sort of creates the narrative in itself, the ambiguity that exists in these headlines, that sort of create, for example, when Bollywood actors are used during certain events, like how Shah Rukh Khan is like one of the famous persons that media houses use. They just generally report, okay, Shah Rukh Khan funded this people, and they generally turn out to be false, but they do get the clicks that are required for them to probably build out revenue, kind of a thing. um, the other example that I have is from a study that we did. We looked at cases of mainstream media. So they can, here there are two cases. One, if the mainstream media has claimed this, or second is when they have sort of retweeted or reshared the story. So these are various instances. So if you can see, there are lots of mainstream, prestigious, non-prestigious, new, old, all kinds of media houses that sort of have shared the story. So now this definitely makes us wonder, why do they do that when we have placed so much trust on media houses? Or are they deliberately doing it, or they're not deliberately doing it? So there's some hypothesis that we can derive through that, is to look at a couple of things here again. Okay, sorry, I have to move here. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah. So one of the major reasons is polarization. So this is one, again, another study that one of the members in my group conducted, where we were looking at impact of politicians engagement with news media from specific news sources. So we have a data set of all news sources that exist on Twitter, and we have a list of politicians and influencers and so on and so forth. So we use those data sets to sort of create make analysis. So if you look at these figures, you can, on the left hand side, you can see that the sources that mostly engaged by politicians are ANI, Times Now, and Aaj Tak, and also NDTV. Whereas if you see the sources that relatively are more engaged when a politician generally retweets them, so if you see the bigger the bubble, that would be ANI, Z News, Hindi, BBC News, Op India, NDTV, The Telegraph. So the similar way, we can see which particular BJP politician retweets which particular news channel. So ANI, ABP News, Republic are generally retweeted. So if you see the orange to be bigger, that would be the indicator. And which are the non-BJP ones would be BBC Hindi, Wire, and NDTV India. So if you see the yellow bubble, the blue bubble, that is bigger. So basically on the right hand side, you can see which particular news channel is mostly retweeted by which politician from which party, basically. So why I bring about polarization here is that uh, a lot of bias reporting comes about from the leaning. So it could be that they are in that particular opinion zone, or it could also be that they probably gain out of doing that because their followers are from that particular um, sector, or view or wing or whatever like that. So that's one thing. The other two things that I had is, one is mid information. So what I call mid information is the evolving nature of scientific consensus and the ambiguity that is attached to it by the veracity of information. So basically saying that, especially in a pandemic, so some news that can be wrong before can be right now, and what was right later could have been wrong before, kind of a thing. So we are amidst information, and that sort of creates um, that creates a ambiguous space for media channels itself. I'm going to quickly go forward and talk about style of broadcasting. The news, we know that clearly has changed. Even major news channels have moved from the primetime news to getting commentators on their show. And this format allows the news channels to engage in disinformation without actually being responsible for it. So say if we invite somebody like Tajinder Bagga, who's a known fake news peddler, and without, even while knowing his background, if somebody is calling them, they are not legally responsible for his opinions, but they're also providing a platform for this person to speak. So these are some of the ways that probably media houses are engaging and sort of promoting and acting as supporting candidates for the misinformation space. And just the last part of how the stories that are generally reported by media houses are used and reused. So basically, one of the ways is fabricating and reusing the stories that they were before posted. Post production would be cropping of images, photoshopping it. Deep fakes are like next level, but they have not seemed to very drastically enter the election cycle yet. And the other one that has caught my attention a lot is the template edit. I can show you an example. So this would be something like that. So there are lots of, it's very easy to sort of create something like this and just put down a breaking news and a headline. So here it says PM Narendra Modi announced to shut down internet services for 1 week to avoid panic in public through social media. While it seems so authentic, it's actually not. It's a fake graphic that was pulled out. Similarly, there was another story like this that put out lions so that people stay indoors. It was an image that was picked out of social media and do like that. It was so easy that I tried to take a dig at CIS and I tried to create something like this, and it hardly took me 2 minutes because it just took a bit of googling and downloading an app off Play Store. So we are in a times where it's just really easy to reshare and make things. So this is some of the context and instances that how media houses exist in the misinformation ecosystem currently.
Thanks, Arnav. I think that was fascinating, and you brought up so many important points that is going to lead up to my next questions. And uh, I think I'll start again with Hania because Zainab brought up the point of polarization, and that got me thinking that a lot of polarization is also sort of now going hand in hand with corporate ownership of media, where like one single corporate conglomerate owns like 10 media houses, right? So, and this is sort of common knowledge in public. So, Tanya, I don't know. I was thinking if you have any opinions on if we ask media channels to place these sort of checks and balances and be open with my channel is owned by Ambani, then how much trust that's actually instituting in readership if they're going and reading news from there, like, or is it like a bigger problem than just asking channels to institute checks and balances and be open about funding and ownership?
I'm saying that, for example, if a channel comes forward and says that they are owned by Ambani, it's not going to do any damage to them because of the fact that Ambani owns the channel, right? I mean, rich people have to fund news media, and that's how news media is running. So there's no doubt about that. Nobody has a problem if Ambani or Adani or whoever runs news channels. The problem is when uh, you fail to disclose that, and your journalism starts to reflect why you fail to disclose that. So that's the whole problem. That's when people start questioning when, for example, the farmers' protest happened. When news channels take a particular angle on the farmers' protest, where they decided from the very beginning to be aggressively against the farmers' protest, or let's say what happened in JNU or Jamia, the protest during the anti-CA protest, when news channels decided this is the angle you will take, that is when a reader is forced to ask, aren't you taking this line because you're funded by so and so? So I'm saying disclosing it should not be a problem for anyone. But these people try not to disclose it because they know that in a matter of 10 days or 20 days, a story that they do will be a biased one, and this whole ownership will be thrown back at them. But this is not kind of information that people can hide forever, which is why we have so many, like for example, you have a news laundry, which I think used to do a project before where they used to trace the funding of each media house. I don't know if they do it anymore, which is the reason why these exercises were done by other media houses, right, to keep in check. So I think the fact that media houses are funded by billionaires or millionaires or conglomerates is not an issue here. The issue is how do they operate as media houses. But in my opinion, of course, we need to keep away that kind of money as much as possible from media houses. And the only way forward is for readers or viewers to start paying. But I think to completely allow media houses to sustain on that kind of money is a dream far away in India.
It's very utopic in that to expect independent journalism to thrive. I had another follow-up question for you because you were mentioning, the flourish and all that. Do you think the pandemic has maybe changed the consumption pattern in terms of how Indians are consuming news? Have they turned more to digital sources, or has the pandemic not really affected any of this?
No, I think definitely the pandemic has made people read more, but there are dips and there are highs. Like when there is a second wave happening and there are lots of deaths around and people are concerned, they're reading more. But then there's a fatigue which sets in almost immediately because, I mean, even I am fatigued by the copies that we have to sit and edit every day. So I cannot blame the reader for that. And then you see a dip immediately. Like, for example, today on my website, the most read copy is 5 places that you can go outside Bangalore for a quick holiday. While we have been trying to make people read about the Hindutva groups targeting interfaith couples in Mangalore and how the information, how the web of informers work, but clearly the reader is like tired of serious news, and it's also all about algorithms, right? So, on what Google does, Facebook does. So I think the pandemic definitely has made people read more from digital sources. But Tosha, I think more than how many people read news, I believe that the pandemic has changed how people perceive media organizations to a large extent. Now, before 2020, any story in which we question the union government, there would be a lot of abuse, or there would be a lot of questioning back as to you are anti-national or you're anti-India. But because the pandemic has hit almost every person in one way or the other, they have realized that it is important to question the government. And they've also realized that things have gone wrong, which is why they have been impacted. So, in one way, the pandemic has made media houses more trustworthy in the eyes of the public, I feel. Like, for example, when Scroll puts out a story saying oxygen plants have not come up in India as much as they should have, where is the money gone? And I like to go see the replies to these tweets and, Facebook posts. And I realize that more people are now receptive to these stories because they have been directly impacted. It's no longer a relationship where a reader is not impacted by anything, and therefore they believe the media is just jobless and they're going on criticizing the government. They've realized that this criticism actually stems from some fact, right? And so that way, I think the credibility of the Indian media, at least a section of digital media for sure, has increased in the eyes of the Indian readers.
That's fascinating, and I'll again circle back to this in a while. But Emmanuel, I think from here I'll pose a question to you, since you are also familiar with GDI's work in other countries. Actually, my question has two prongs. One is that, have you observed, like what Dhania said, have you observed similar levels of maybe variations in trust in media in different countries that you have surveyed? And second is that, is there anything that you've found that's sort of common in the Indian media market as opposed to other media markets? For example, what makes a specific site trustworthy versus what makes a specific site at high risks of disinformation?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that I think, generally speaking, the issue with disinformation is an issue with abundance. There is actually too much information, so it's actually in a way a good problem to have. So India has become such an evolved kind of in a first world country when it comes to information. There is so getting so sophisticated. So this is a side effect, and is actually going to grow. And this is an issue that all Western countries have. So in a way, I would say, is a problem that is here to stay. And another issue that we see for all emerging markets, and this is something experience I have also before joining GDI, growth hides problems. So this actually, when a market grows really, really quick, there is also the relative share of what is really goes unchecked is also big. There is just, there's not been enough time to really to take care of excesses and really cleanse it. So this is also something we see in common with other emerging markets, that there is really no other emerging, I mentioned earlier, that no other emerging market is growing as fast as India, but still is something we see. For example, China, we saw on the chart before, had with even bigger problems when it comes to distrust in institutions. So in information, so it is in a way a problem with growth. So other markets that are growing very quickly, very similar. I saw Indonesia, all the BRICS economy. So we see similar patterns, but of course India is unique in the way that is so. There are so much diversity in cultures and languages and political views. So something that we've seen more of, or maybe I'll mention something we've seen more of in other markets, are other aspects of the political polarization, which is really, in a way, is a form of abuse. These sites abusing the ad policy. They're just some actors are just surfing the policy lines, trying to increase the bottom line by really stoking the fire on societal issues that are really there, and they may, in a way that really harms fragile groups. So it could be from misogyny to anti a specific group, but it's really there is an underlying problem there. They're just exploiting this. Something that we haven't seen in India that they might come up in this. We have seen some in some other regions of the world, is foreign influence. So foreign governments would really try to weaken the nation by sowing distrust in the institutions. And this is something that is a bit controversial because really gets mistaken with politics, which is really something else. It's really closer to national defense in a way. But it's really insidious in democracies, which is again a good thing to have. It is a problem that really only democracies have, and is a good problem to have. But we need to be careful of that, because it's really, there is a lot of disinformation nowadays. Where now we are tracking a growth in aliens. Who would have thought that 2021 would be the year when aliens disinformation come, front and center. But yeah, that is an interesting thing. We always mention. Our co-founder CTO Danny Rogers also usually mentioned this. We are the way we define this information really makes it clear that it's not about the fake parts. The aliens potentially are true, but who knows? There is actually really serious scientists looking at the sky for extraterrestrial life. Could be a bacteria living on faraway planets, and there is nothing bad with that. The conspiracy, the bad part of the conspiracy. The alien conspiracy is the conspiracy part. The fact that we believe that there is actually a full alien hidden somewhere in the basement of the Pentagon, and they are hiding it to us. That is really the concerning part, not the fact that it's true or false in itself. So this is kind of the more insidious part of this information that we see when there is really a bad intention being hidden, and it can really be hiding itself in polarization that is already there in the society for other reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, a follow-up question would be that you mentioned foreign influence with the intention of weakening national security or like democracy is something that you've observed in other countries. I'm very interested to know how it actually manifests in terms of like how does foreign disinformation exactly work, as you have observed and you have mentioned.
But in the democratic process, the most fragile moment is election time, of course. So that's where get really. For example, later this year, there is an election in Germany, and we are paying close attention to that. But generally speaking, it's an ongoing process. Foreign nations will try to make other competitive nations weaker. So that is something to keep in mind. And nations that are strong usually have good trust, not particularly in one particular politician, but in the institution itself, which is the democratic institution and process. I can do more specific examples, but we know in Europe, this is in East Europe, this is an issue, and some areas of the world, this is an issue. But yeah, we really look at it from a broad spectrum. It's like either targeting a minority or a sensitive group, institution, or science, like we've seen so much of in the last year with anti-vax disinformation and with coronavirus disinformation. I'll give you an example that something quite, it would be funny if it wasn't said, happening in the UK at the beginning of the pandemic. There was a lot of disinformation around 5G, causing any sort of diseases before the pandemic. And as soon as the pandemic exploded, of course, 5G gives coronavirus. So suddenly we had like examples of 5G towers set ablaze in London because of this conspiracy theory. And there is a narrative behind that. There is a hateful narrative behind that. But it really is a clear case of how anti-science can turn into reality, into really concerning things in real life.
Thanks. I think that's fascinating. The 5G correlation actually did not occur to me, but yeah, it's I think one of the clearest examples of how it's not a problem in like the online sphere anymore, and how it sort of manifests into real offline issues. And you see that sort of with disinformation that systematically targets marginalized groups, and how that also spinballs into actual humanitarian violences.
Yeah, I'll just add that what we really see the underlying issue is the incentive structure. So the way the web works right now is that page views equal money. And there is, of course, our tech policies, they have policies in place for publisher policies that limit the full range of what publishers could cover to get traffic. But we see that these policies need to be reinforced, and we advocate for that. For example, we saw some progress made by some companies like Google this year introduced the policy for not allowing a content that is against scientific consensus and is in a global pandemic. So basically, coronavirus disinformation. It is borderline. Sometimes some topics are not yet covered. Like for example, climate change disinformation is not really. There's no clear policy on that. On hate speech, it's usually quite covered, and other policies are not. They are lacking. So we see there is a strange incentive in place as the advertising, the global ad tech industry and the online advertising market is so huge, and there is really a need for a third-party evaluation and really someone to create incentives that may not be immediately good for the business, but they're really good in the long term. It's really about shifting ad dollars from ad rupees from one particular kind of content to a quality one. So really incentivizing the creation of good quality content and disincentivizing the creation of content that just sells, but it's like junk food in a way.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's also poses my next question, which is to Zainab. In terms of like the policies that are in place for tackling disinformation, right? Institutional policies for, say, for digital media websites as well. So in your research, have you found that there are like maybe like prestige legacy media houses are actually like doing better as opposed to newer media houses, or as opposed to, you know, media houses which only have a web presence? Is that like a correlation that you have found? And the second question is, when have you found any correlation between sensational headlines and like the article also being disinforming? Because sometimes we have found, like in our research, we have found that even though the title is super clickbaity, the article is more or less neutral. It really relates to like the weather or petrol prices, but the article, like the title, is just completely out of the world sensational. So would be really interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, this is a bit slightly technical, but yeah, we've seen this happening also with reputable news outlets, and it's really about, you know, based on the incentive structure of the web. So sometimes we see really reputable sites that are using a different headline for social media and regular web, and of course the one for social media is more clickbaity. Sometimes they really actually this has become quite common practice in news houses. They have different titles and they rotate them, and they see which one gets more clicks. And yeah, this, we can imagine the consequences of this. So it's part of it is very hard to eliminate.
Yeah, thanks. And Zainab, would you like to also maybe comment, like given your experience with the empirical side of disinformation? Over to you, Zainab.
So I can't definitely say it's prestige, but like even what your report found and to what I have seen, there is no direct. You can't say that nobody engages in disinformation, because there might be a couple of reasons why they ended up using disinformation. It might be incentives, it could be misreporting, whatever. So there is no direct correlation that I have definitely found. But the interesting part, what I see, is the way that media houses put out stories, right, without having to legally be responsible for it. For example, if we take the Sushant Singh Rajput case, right? So it became such a huge global question itself. So none of the media houses said, okay, this is a suicide. I mean, okay, well, let's say some of them said, but directly there was no correlation. But the questions were like, is Aditya Thackeray part of this question mark? So it leaves this space or a gap for information to be filled in and to lead to conspiracies developing. So be it a high prestigious media house, be it a low digital media house which just wants sort of a click, these kind of headlines sort of create that ambiguity that is required for news to just flow and any perceptions to be sort of developed. So like and your second question is was sensationalist reporting and biased sensationalist headlines and biased reporting. So there are, in that case, there are many instances where the headline is just sort of saying something, but probably the article, when you read it, it's actually reporting the right stuff. So all about what the narrative is and how you write the narrative, and who is your audience and what you're appealing to. And it's clearly seen that it is the case that they do, because paid per view. So you can't really question that. I mean, I don't have a direct statistic to quote, but I can definitely see what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think like from the conversation with all of you, what's really coming clear is that all of this, there is a money, like a very clear correlation between revenue generation and like the creation of disinforming material, right? So it's like in terms of how it generates clicks, or the way social media is constructed, where um like sensationalist headlines will garner more attention than a neutral headline, irrespective of what the content actually is. And I mean, that also actually loops back to what Dhanya had earlier said, that different media prongs of the same entity has different like belligerent tones versus more neutral tones. So, and do you think is that because like what sells for the media prong? So for a newspaper, maybe if it's like the textual interpretation of someone screaming, then that's like that may not actually sell as well. But for TV channels where people don't really watch the TV news for getting information, but for to be entertained, it makes sense for them to be more dramatic, or have that sort of sensationalist approach to how they convey news. So yeah.
Yeah, so see, first thing is that definitely, I mean, there are some 50 news portals putting out the same story at the same time. There are some 100 news channels putting out the same story at the same time. So who should the viewer choose? Who should the reader choose? Which is the reason why people look for angles in a story. Some people just report it straight. Another person goes for the opinion. Next person goes for outrage. So there are various views, various ways in which news organizations react to a piece of news and how they put it out, right? You can call it clickbait. You can call it sensationalist. I'm not saying that all of this does not happen. It does happen. In fact, in organizations I worked in, the organization I run, I myself know when something is clickbaity or something is, is sensationalist. But end of the day, news organizations also have to survive. And for survival, they have to depend on the revenue. And for revenue, unfortunately, they have to depend upon what people read. Now, I would like to also point out that studies, though I'm a media person who agrees that the media needs a course correction, though there are a lot of things going wrong in the way we put out stories and whether you call it clickbaity, etc. I think we also have to look at the reader or viewer's tendencies. For example, when I used to work in television, I have reported on everything from politics to sports and movies a little less because I don't understand either. But yes, I've reported a lot on politics, natural disasters, etc., and environment. And I was under the impression that people actually watch all this. Also because you have no other option, right? You put on a news channel, you just end up watching whatever stories there. You take a newspaper, you've paid money, you've bought it. So you do browse through everything which is there in the newspaper, whether you're interested or not. But digital does not work like that. I can put out 50 stories, but it's a very democratic space. I can't go and tell somebody, you like the news minute, 50 stories are there today, read each one. They will not even read even one a day. So what I'm coming to is that I have realized over the years that readers are also very hypocritical. For example, if I put a story out saying mangroves in Tamil Nadu are under threat, which means that floods can happen again and again in Chennai, believe me, 500 people will share that story, but I know 5 people have clicked it. At the same time, if I write that Nayantara and that Vignesh are going to get married, or Vignesh has yesterday apparently he posted that the food he likes best is the fish curry or something that Nayantara cooks, right? If I put out that story, nobody will share, but immediately 5,000 people will read. Because digital is such a space. And then, the moment you put out a story of, like, for example, I'm saying the News Minute puts out a story saying Nayantara's fiance says he likes the ghee rice that she makes. Some 1,500 comments will come saying, do you not have anything else to do? I'm telling you, that's what people read a lot. I'm not saying that people read the most, but people do read that a lot. So how do you expect news organizations to behave? Are they not allowed to then react to what the market asks them to do? They will. They obviously will, because that's how the system works, right? So let's also call out audiences. Let's not only blame news organizations is what I want to say. And I say this in every event. Maybe I do piss off people saying this, but this is reality. People also behave like I personally am interested in covering manual scavenging deaths. Every time there are manual scavenger deaths, we put out stories. And I'm telling you, people immediately share, they outrage, but they don't actually read. I've told people in my office many times, we should put the headline as Infosys engineer falls from 5th floor and dies. And inside the story, it should be about a manual scavenger dying. People click because the Infosys engineer is what attracts them. This is the reality of news. It's a problem of both the news organization and the leader. I don't know what is the solution or what is the way forward, but I think both are reacting to each other, which perhaps is not good for the environment in totality.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, now that you're saying it to me, it seems like a chicken and egg situation, that is it the reader who is to blame, or is it the revenue generation of the digital systems revenue generation model that is to blame? So which comes first? I see Zainab has.
So,
sorry.
Antosha, I think,
Yeah.
see, despite all that I said, for example, Nayantara's fiance liking her ghee rice is fine. I mean, that's still a story I wouldn't mind putting, but there is no way that I will cross that line where I will do 100 stories on why Sushant Singh Rajput died, simply because that brings me revenue or that brings me clicks. So I think at the end of the day, every news organization should have that one line that they will not cross, no matter how low their clicks are or how reader engagement has gone down. The problem is that we need to have revenue streams which make us go beyond reader engagement. Because if I start depending on Google, like if I go to my Google suggest today, I don't even know what Google is suggesting, like seriously. So I can't keep producing content based on that, right? I have to look at other things.
Zainab, you had raised your hand. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to add a point to what Dhanya was saying, is like in agreeing with her, that another aspect that I think she didn't mention here is the resources, right? So like the availability of resources that news organizations itself have. So say if it's a bigger organization or prestige organization, they have ground reporting kind of resources that they can use. But say if it's not, it's a digital this thing, they don't have, so the veracity itself changes. And then it's not just the incentive, and then what Danya said about what audience are preferring and what followers are doing, and what their preferences are. It's also about incentives, and this is coming from not talking to media organizations, but like fact checking organizations, where they are the ones who are considered to be transparent. So considering they are IFCN certified, they are supposed to be transparent. They would have released who their funders are, etc., etc. But their whole narrative of what they report shifts because of the availability of resources. And like that's another just point I wanted to add.
No, for sure. I think we were earlier also talking about independent journalism and sources of funding, and that's definitely like a utopic dream where revenue is not solely dependent on clicks, or revenue is not solely dependent on like the whims of the corporate overlords. I think my final question is for all the panelists. So we'll go around, and like maybe all of you can comment on this. Is just where do we go from here, right? So we have this, I mean, this report affirms it, but we all sort of already knew that Indian digital market does have a disinformation risk. So maybe Dania, you can start, and then we can all talk a little bit about what can be our next steps, or what can media markets do to increase their perception or increase their reliability, or or is this a problem that's beyond the media, like individual media markets themselves?
So I really think there are two issues in India, right? One is that there is a problem as far as the media is concerned. There is disinformation, misinformation, not covering parts of a story or twisting stories, all that exists. And I believe that digital media houses especially have to be careful from now, because as a survey, as your report also shows, people using these digital portals are increasing, and it is increasing in a large number every year, which means that as media organizations, we have to be more reliable. We have to ensure that we follow all the norms of good journalism when we put out these stories. And I think that I think in English it's a little better, but in many of the languages, there are two. I mean, I think if you look at Telugu, some of the language content, right, it is highly problematic, much more problematic than what English content is. So I think we need to ensure that the media has some self-regulation. And like I said before, the option before us cannot be what the government has said, which is the digital media rules, but instead the industry itself should move towards some sort of self-regulation. And that's really the only way forward. But sadly, though the media has all these problems, and yes, we are at fault for a lot of criticism that comes at us, there is also this very deliberate attempt to malign the media and to discredit the media, which is which in India, sadly, I mean, as we have seen in America when Trump was there, and many other countries, it is government driven also to a large extent, right? So we have a dual problem here. One is that yes, the media itself has to work better in a way that they become more credible, but at the same time, even if you are credible, there are forces which want to prove that you are not credible. So for us in the media, it's a double fight. It's a so I think both these have to go hand in hand, and I'm hoping that at least DigiPub, which is the organization that I represent, we will have some code of ethics and a code of conduct very soon, so that all our members at least will adhere to it. But it's too large a space and it's too democratic a space. Plus, every single day there are new websites coming up. So I'm not really sure if most of these things will work unless, and we also only know about a few websites which perhaps journalists that we know have set up. The number of websites which are run by just tech people, taking whatever is good on the algorithm and putting on, we don't even know how many websites are there. So yes, self-regulation, I believe, is the only way forward for the digital media. And as far as mainstream media is concerned, the traditional media houses are concerned, I hope that there is more integrity. Like I said in the beginning, different arms of their media organizations itself behave very differently. Like one will be right, one will be left, one will be centrist, one will be bigoted, one will be non-bigoted. I hope they have a policy where they behave the same way, because at least as a reader, I get confused as to whether to criticize someone or not. Because on one end, they will be really factual, on the other arm, they will not be. So I hope that traditional media also understands that digital is not the space where they can just put out any junk. They also treat it like that a lot. So I hope that changes.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think, and I should have mentioned this also earlier, like it's in the report that any of our findings isn't an endorsement for why the digital media rule should be there, right? Because the government has cited fake news to say that.
Yeah, you have one whole section on it, which is very good.
Yeah, because otherwise we didn't want this to be like an evidence that the proponents of rules can cite saying that, see, this is fake news is a problem, so this is why digital media should be regulated in this way.
The government's whole thing that they are bringing these rules, for example, during the press conference in which Prakash Javadekar and Ravi Shankar Prasad took part, when I quickly finish, they kept saying that we have to fight child pornography, we have to fight defamation. They behaved as if digital media is in a vacuum. We operate in a vacuum where none of the Indian laws are applicable to us. That's not true. Every Indian law, like laws of defamation, hate speech, even sedition for that matter, everything and anything is used against the media. And people can sue the media or take them to court or whatever if they find that a particular news story is incorrect or it's defamatory, right? So it's not like there are no laws binding the media. They behave like that completely. And of course, the whole point of the digital rules was to make sure there is no parliament sanction and that the government just tries to control OTT and digital everything, which is why I appreciate the fact that the report clearly mentioned that this is not an endorsement of any kind for the IT rules.
Yeah, it's the IT rules are like a contentious issue, so it's very unfortunate if this piece of important research is used for that. Emmanuel, I come to you. Any closing remarks? Where do we go from here? What can we do?
Yeah, I wanted to start with a comment to what that Dania mentioned earlier. So I would say summarizes the hard realities of online web content economics. So clickbait sells. There's no way around it. But the way I like a parallel. Maybe forgive me, as I'm Italian. I always think about food. I like to have a parallel between nutrition and information. Good nutrition is about the right amount, not having too much. So it's about curing the excesses. There's always going to be junk food. Is always going to, fries are always going to be great, tasty, and even to be healthy, you don't need to completely take them out. So it's really what we focus on is really not changing the human nature, but really just avoiding the excesses and moving forward to really the question: how do we move forward from here? What solutions we have in mind, Julia? We're very focused. We think we have actually the solution that works best to really do this. So really, it's such a big space, and it's really hard to change it. But we can nudge it. We can slightly nudge the incentive structure by basically providing more information to advertisers, who are really the VIP of the web party. They really influence and they create incentives for the media ecosystem. So quality publishers really, we think they really stand to earn from what we do, providing this information on quality to big advertisers as display. From a point of view of advertisers, we see when we have conversation with them, we realize that they have plenty of choice. They can advertise on search, on YouTube, on social, on any platforms, and they usually don't trust themselves display advertising on newspapers. So this is part of the issue why revenue is going down and it's so difficult to keep up RPMs. So there is this, usually newspapers tend to compensate sometimes with just driving more traffic in any way possible. So if we actually provide more information on what newspapers are doing really quality work, this actually makes it more likely that more ad revenue globally, digital, will actually spill over to display, which is a good thing because we need more money to the media ecosystem. Anyone who's really spending time and investing, really creating value for the world by creating information that is not there. So one of the last, we speak with some large ad tech companies and advertisers, and one of the biggest actually mentioned they want data to help them recognize good quality journalism in markets that they don't know much about. Let's say small markets in South America, and this information is not there. And until they have that information, they would not advertise on display. So the real problem is that advertisers are not really willing with programmatic advertising being programmatic and being so automated. Advertisers not really able to tell the good from the bad. So the problem is, I think the underlying problem we see is that where traffic gets monetized in a way that is pretty much predictable. So just getting more traffic usually systematically makes more money. And that is really the core of the problem. As an advertiser has maybe in their ESG corporate priorities, they want to be against discrimination, racism, misogyny, and so on. And then they end up advertising completely unwittingly next to content that has exactly these narratives. They are not happy to see that, and we do some advocacy work to make them more aware of what's really going on. And the programmatic it's really hard to automate completely on the web. I think ad tech companies are doing an amazing job, but there is something missing there. So it's really, we think there is the focus on changing the incentive structure is what can move us forward with relatively little effort, because it's such a giant to influence.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as I can think, economic sort of trying to disincentivize economically is a relatively newer approach, as opposed to like earlier when people are just remove fake news, do not share fake news. So it's another way of looking at the problem of regulating disinformation and fake news. And I think with time we'll also sort of understand the challenges and where to go from there. And finally, Zena, how solutions, recommendations, any optimistic note we can maybe end up on?
I think I would like to start my opinion with a disclaimer saying that as a researcher who's studying behind on a digital space, I don't have a standpoint that really will be the solution, like compared to somebody like Dhanya, who's probably is on the front lines and who knows what actually is going on the field, kind of a thing. For me, while Dhanya and Emmanuel both covered the financial incentive aspect of this thing, I think I want to comment on the comical and the politically motivated aspect of spreading of misinformation. Is that so? These for me is a problem not of trust but of consensus that sort of exists among people, and how there is more division than any cohesion currently, and how we can see that there is a drastic increase in how you believe in news by affiliation rather than by prestige of an organization or by tradition. So for me, if you ask me where do we go from here, I don't know. But it's, I think the problem that we need to sort of think about more objectively is the digital space that brings about the disconsensus that sort of exists in the space, and how that sort of is creating. I think that's going to be the issue that's going to come forward, rather than trust in institutions, because somebody is going to believe in some institution or the other. So it's more about how do you build cohesion in a digital space which is so vast. So I think that's where I stand at.
Yeah, I think that might also be a more structural problem as opposed to, actions any particular individual parties can affect, can make to affect things. I think we have a little bit of time to answer a couple of questions. The first one was from Pratik, who had asked that just curious if there is a plan to release site-wise scores for the ones that were assessed for researchers. I think the answer is no. We're only looking at sites that are minimum risk under every pillar. If Manuel, please correct me if you're wrong. We don't release like specific individual scores for the sites that are assessed, right?
Yeah, so we don't publish the entire data set, as we don't want to really engage in public controversy. So we put so many steps in keeping in our data usually independent. We don't want this to become like a controversial thing in itself. But we can share data with research institutions. So we also license data to and actually have an impact. Any application that can have an impact in the ecosystem.
Next question comes from Alaf. Yeah, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. The question is that, did you look at the extent to which Facebook and Google fund newsrooms and fact-checking initiatives in India, and how problematic is that relationship? I don't think we did. Like, fact checkers were not in our scope of study at all. It was exclusively looking at digital news websites. But of course, fact checkers do have a very important role in the entire disinformation cycle, and their ideologies will also impact the fact checking ideologies as well. The last question, I think everybody can maybe take a minute to answer, and that's from anonymous attendee, which says, how can we tackle the problem of consumers' ideologies or bias versus trustworthiness of the information consumed? So, Tanya, if you like to maybe take a minute and answer that, and we can all comment on that.
How can we tackle the problem of consumer ideologies
versus trustworthiness of the information consumed? So,
no, first thing, I don't believe the two are connected all the time. Which is, even if the news is trustworthy or the information is trustworthy, the consumer's bias makes him or her disbelieve in that piece of news. I mean, all of us, I think, live in this whole vortex of confirmation bias. For example, in my family, I have a lot of BJP supporters, okay? Including my own father, who were very proud when I was reporting on the corruption of the UPA government, how DMK ministers were jailed, and they kept sharing my stories. Then they were very happy. They had no problems with it. Today, if I do a story against the government now, they are like, you are targeting the Indian government, you are anti-national. So I'm doing the same job as I was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But it's the perception of what I'm doing that has changed. And I cannot be continuously battling that perception. In fact, when I started becoming more active on social media, one huge thing, I would now say one weakness that all of us have when we are suddenly on social media is to look at what is our audience bias, that whole echo chamber that you live in. And then you start reporting stories in such a way that you start almost reflecting what your audience wants. And within a year or two, I realized that's not going to work out, because the audience is becoming increasingly polarized. And if we keep doing that, then our journalism takes a setback, right? So we cannot keep engaging with audiences that way, that we have to understand that there are certain biases that an audience has, and that bias is only increasing in current India because we are becoming more polarized as a society. We have to live with that. But like I said, I at least believe that there is a silver lining. Like, for example, the pandemic has made a lot of people see reason, that there is a reason why the media is criticizing the government, that not everything this so-called not credible media is saying is false. So slowly and steadily, for at least a section of people who are largely neutral, that that whole disbelievable factor, the fact that they did not want to believe the media, that's reducing. So I think events like this, which will happen, will create a better understanding between the media and the consumer. But we cannot be constantly addressing that as a journalist, I feel, because then we will fall into a trap.
Yeah. Emmanuel, would you like to maybe comment on that? You're on mute, sorry.
So I don't have anything specific to add on that.
Okay. And Zainab?
Yeah, I don't have anything specific to that, but I have a question actually. Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would generally want to know what, say, to probably solve this problem, would something like, say, crowd-funded media channels, forget independent because that will come with leaning bias, but say crowd-funded kind of like, say, PVC in US or something, do those kind of stuff solve? I mean, I think Emmanuel or Danya might.
So I definitely think that's the only way forward. Like, for example, Emmanuel was speaking about disincentivizing, like if there's hate speech, or I mean, I've seen it happen many times when a news organization has reported something which amounts to hate speech, and advertisers have pulled out. So that's one way. That is how to penalize people who cross that line. But how do you help people who do not cross that line, who are doing good journalism? And I think the only way out really is for some sort of revenue models where the reader or the viewer pitches in. But unfortunately, the Indian market is not ready or is not mature enough to help media organizations survive and sustain only on that. I mean, it has become a lot better in the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, we also started our membership thing only 1 year ago, and it's going pretty well. But it should, looking at the number of people who write to us and say, I really like your stories, you guys do well, the number is not that great. So I'm saying a lot more people have to understand that you have to pay for news because it's an important part of your life. You cannot keep ignoring disinformation, and you cannot keep ignoring fake news, hate speech, etc. And that you have to contribute to the news environment. I'm hoping that in the next 10 to 15 years, there would be a news channel which is funded by viewers. Though Zainab, that seems far away. Let's at least look for a digital site which is less number of employees to run only on reader funds. But yeah, crowdfund, maybe if someone can try. But there are too many laws, you can't do crowdfund if you're a for-profit, etc. So there are lots of issues also in doing something like that.
Yeah. So maybe finally it comes down to individual moral compass, and that's the solution.
Yeah, it's a very, very depressing, or I don't know, it's both depressing and empowering. Like, the change begins with you. So, I mean, one of the answers is to more fund, like Danya said, pay for news or fund more independent journalism per se. Emmanuel, did you have anything to add to this?
Well, I personally think the open web that is free, it still has value. I think it will be there for long term. So yeah, I think one thing definitely, paywalls can have a big impact on active members, and I think is absolutely great. But it should be probably like a freemium model is more realistic for where there is actually access to some content for free, and then maybe special content for premium members. But yeah, what I think, kind of being repetitive maybe a little bit, I think transparency is the issue. Advertisers need to know what is quality, what is not, and they sometimes too often they don't have the data to really tell. Like for example, for TV, it's pretty obvious which channels are national channels are good and which one are less quality. With the problem with the internet that is so big, so sometimes we track the web, we see that, for example, the top some site ratings only affect the top million sites on the web, and there is about 1 billion sites on the web. So 0.1% is what we consider as the top of the web, and is at such a huge long tail. The distribution of the web is really so spread out that it's really hard for advertisers to tell. So what's happening right now, they completely give up that choice and the decision power to tech companies, and I think that can be done in a better way, at least for the top of the market.
I think it's also emblematic of like the way web has sort of evolved in the last 2 decades. So it was actually an open web when it started out, but now it has been like it's gotten more and more concentrated, like not just in terms of digital markets, but also like platforms and other gatekeepers. And I mean, this is a conversation that I can have for another 2 hours. It's something that I'm extremely like interested in, passionate, but unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you so much for all of you for taking the time to join. This was, I enjoyed this conversation immensely. And I hope this was interesting and insightful for you and for anyone listening. And I really hope that the report actually sort of serves as an important conversation starter on digital disinformation market. And for any researchers that are working in this area, it's a resource, and like Pranav said, as also referential material. We will be sending the report to everyone who signed up. So, and it will also be on our website. So please do check it out. And if you have any further questions later, I think you can reach out to us. I think most of us have Twitter IDs. Pranav and Gushwar does. So please reach out to them or email us, and we'll try to answer your questions. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, have a good day, have a good evening, wherever you're from. And yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.